We open in welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on in their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomic Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together shall one day know full justice.
Welcome to Accotank Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Nancy Melito. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be your worship associate today. I hope you got a name tag or have put your name on your Zoom name tag. If you need help with that, let us know in the chat. If you are not new to Accotank, look around. Do you see people you haven't met or haven't spoken to in a while? These people like you and want to meet you. You should do that. Help us live up to our mission to be a welcoming and inclusive spiritual home for all by reaching out and making a connection. By visiting this congregation, newcomers are in a transition moment, and people in transitions are more open to new friendships. That means that your new best friend might be here this morning, and this is your chance to get to them before somebody else does. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we do encourage you to stay for our social hour, online and in person, immediately after the service. We're so delighted you decided to join us today. Welcome.
So this is the beginning of our exploration this month of our monthly theme of transformation for this month. We're going to talk about transformation. And today, that means that we're going to talk about growing in spirit. Those words are in our mission statement. Together we care in community, together we act for justice, and together we grow in spirit. So I thought, a whole year ago actually I thought, and I put it on the worship calendar for this Sunday, a whole year ago, to talk about what do we mean when we say spirit. So we're going to explore that today. I wrote my sermon out this week, and I just wasn't happy with it, so I'm going to be preaching from notes, or almost from no notes, which feels appropriate when we're talking about spirit. You know, I'll be spirit-led this morning. Although I also wanted to share what's probably an apocryphal story. Apocryphal means it didn't really happen, but there's a story about Martin Luther and someone suggesting to Martin Luther, you know, the reformist of Protestantism, that he listen to the Spirit and not prepare a script. And Martin Luther responded, he said, I did do that once. And the Spirit said to me, write it down ahead of time next time. You're not meant to just preach in the moment. So hopefully I do a little bit better than Martin Luther this morning. And then we'll continue that exploration of transformation throughout the month. Next Sunday, we have one of our lay-led ensemble services. I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about living the question, inspired by the poet Rainer Maria Rilke's statement in Letters to a Young Poet that sometimes we don't know the answers. We just live the question until we find ourselves living ourselves into the answer. So that's next Sunday. So you can actually get to look at that search for truth and meaning that we all engage in and that we name as Unitarian Universalists that we're engaging in. And then I mentioned this last Sunday, but you know, we've handed out those bookmarks with our new proposed UU values, and the short version of that for transformation says, transform the world with love. But I actually stole that from a different section of our Article 2, and the actual first line is, we adapt to a changing world. And so that's what I'm going to talk with you about 2 Sundays from now, adapting to a changing world, because I just find that's a little bit less ambitious than transforming the world with love, and it's more, it's what I'm doing right now, right? It's what we're doing in so many moments of our life, practicing how to adapt to a changing world. So, and maybe Spirit can help us with that, or maybe we should have a plan, depending whether we're more Martin Luther-like or not. Martin Luther King, by the way, this is a little known fact, I think. His I Have a Dream speech, the I Have a Dream part of that speech, he did not write down ahead of time. Mahalia Jackson called out from the crowd at the march and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And he preached that without a script. So you want to know, am I a Martin Luther type person or a Martin Luther King Jr. type person? That's what I'm getting at. All right.
Good morning. Good morning. So this morning, our Time for All Ages is from a book entitled All the World by Liz Garton-Shanton and Caldecott Honor Medalist Marla Fraz. All the world is here, it is there, it is everywhere. All the world is right where you are now. So this book follows a circle of family and friends through the course of a day from morning until night. This book affirms the importance of all things great and small in our world, from the tiniest shell on the beach to the warmth of family connections to the widest sunset sky. All the World by Liz Garton-Scallion, illustrated by Marla Fraz. Rock, stone, pebble, sand. Body, shoulder, arm, hand. A moat to dig, a shell to keep. All the world is wide and deep. Hive, bee, wings, hum. Husk, cob, corn, yum. Tomato blossom, fruit so red. All the world's a garden bed. Tree, trunk, branch, crown. Climbing up and sitting down. Morning sun becomes noon blue. All the world is old and new. Road, street, track, path. Ship, boat, wooden raft. Nest, bird, feather, fly. All the world has got its sky. Slip, trip, stumble, fall. Tip the bucket, spill it all. Better luck another day. All the world goes round this way. Table, bowl, cup, spoon. Hungry tummy, supper soon. Butter, flour, big black pot. All the world is cold and hot. Spreading shadows, setting sun. Crickets, curtains, day is done. A fire takes away the chill. All the world can hold quite still. Nana's, papa's, cousins, kin. Piano, harp, and violin. Babies passed from neck to knee. All the world is you and me. Everything you hear, smell, see. All the world is everything. Everything is you and me. Hope and peace and love and trust. All the world is all of us.
Our reading today is from Parker Palmer. Whenever I speak with people about soul, I always try to acknowledge the fact that this is one of those words that has to be held very lightly because it points toward a mystery. And it's a mystery for which nobody has the true name or the real story. Every tradition has, I think, a name for it, a different name. The Hasidic Jews call it the spark of the divine in every human being. Buddhists, I think, call it big self sometimes. Herself with a capital S. Thomas Merton called it a true self. Quakers, I'm a Quaker, and we tend to call it the inner light or the inner teacher. And I think all of these are our synonyms for the same thing. And what that thing is, no one really knows. The best I can do is to say that it's the being in a human being. So what a person calls it doesn't matter to me, but that we call it something matters a lot. Since the soul itself is a mystery that nobody has a name for, I think the closest you can come is with an image or a metaphor. The soul, as I experience it, is very much like a wild animal. A wild animal has the capacity to survive in the deep, dark forest, in very difficult places, places where there's hardly anything to eat. A wild animal has strength and has resilience and has a kind of wiliness and a kind of knowing about survival that the human soul has, on which we depend. I would think anybody who's ever been in a really tough situation would say, something inside me allowed me to keep going. Something inside me kept carrying me forward. So the soul has this strength. At the same time, just like a wild animal, the soul is also very shy. And we know that if we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is to run crashing into the woods, running and screaming for it to come out. What we need to do is to walk into the woods quietly, sit at the base of a tree, breathe with the earth for a while, and eventually the thing we seek may put in an appearance. If it does, we may only catch it out of the corner of our eye. But to see something so original, so wild, so natural, so elemental, I think for most of us is to never forget it.
Nancy will also be leaving us to give readings. No, I'm kidding. Nancy's not going anywhere. Thank you for that wonderful reading of Parker Palmer. I was laughing as I was listening because Parker says that there's really no word, one word that can describe what he means when he talks about soul. So I feel okay that I'm actually talking about spirit, not soul. And I'm using his words where he's talking about soul to talk about spirit. It seems like that's okay because it's not, we're pointing at the moon, not actually ever knowing fully what the moon is. And just in case I need a little more support, people online get to answer our Greet Your Neighbor question, and Emily Woodcock's in describing spirit, right, our question said, I would describe it as the part of something you cannot touch or feel. It is the soul. So Emily knows what I'm talking about. This is a reading, and it's interesting because I think that there's a reason to treat readings like Scripture. And by that I mean to spend time with them over a period of time. Because in our starting points, which is an offering that we have, that we offer occasionally to new members or newcomers to come and join and learn about this congregation and really share with each other their spiritual journey. In those gatherings, we share this, actually a video of Parker Palmer sharing these words with us. And myself and many people in starting points don't resonate with this whole wild animal as the soul thing, I've noticed often. But I've helped facilitate starting points 3 or 4 times now, and every time coming back to it, that wild animal imagery is starting to sink in and have meaning for me. I'll share that I've had some sightings of wild animals recently. I like to bike to keep my body and my psyche healthy, equally important for both. And I saw, while I was biking in the rain by the Rappahannock River a week ago, last week, a great blue heron chilling there, in his zen, standing there in the rain. Okay, he actually looked like he was like, when is this going to end? This is a bummer, but I'll just chill here. And then I also bike around Burke Lake, and just Thursday night, I was biking around Burke Lake, and I got to see a blue heron that was startled by my biking fly across the lake. I saw a fox recently near here when I was starting my drive back home. But this morning, when I was just leaving my house, this deer comes bounding towards the road, and I had enough time to be like, do I speed up? Do I slow down? Do I slam on the brakes? And I just was able to slow down, and the deer went across the road. And I said to my child, I said, "Hi, look at that. Look at the deer." And we're looking at the deer. And then, just a moment later, another deer comes bounding out, and I had to slam on the brakes. And I don't usually have somebody in my passenger seat, so all the stuff I keep on the passenger seat went flying, just from catching that wild animal out of the corner of my eye, as Parker Palmer discusses. Now, I love Parker Palmer's explanation of the soul, the spirit, this ineffable experience, but I also don't want us to think that this catching it out of the glimpse of our eye is something that isn't accessible. So when I've applied for ministry jobs, to be a chaplain in a hospital, to go to congregations, and I'm applying to different hospitals and different congregations, I have this practice I do, which I think is like looking for spirit out of the corner of my eye. And what I do is, after the interview, I write down, like on the top of the little packet about the organization, what poet or musician it feels like that place and those people are going to be like. Because I've found that I can do the like pros and cons with my mind when I'm looking for a job, and they're just going to cancel each other out. And that I actually usually know in my heart or in my spirit where I'm called to go. So this practice of naming the spirit of a community in this way helps me to connect, helps me to glimpse that inner teacher, that inner guide in these moments. So perhaps you have practices like that. Oh, I will share. I do have a few notes. I will share that, if memory serves correct, Accutink felt to me before I got here, and I think this is still true, like the poetry of Mary Oliver. So, I mean, y'all pat yourself on the back. And where I served as a chaplain, Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, or the chaplaincy department there, feels like the poetry of Wendell Berry. So you can see, how this kind of works and how places have different spirits, different characters. Communities have different spirits, different characters. So that's one aspect of what we might mean when we talk about spirit. But I have a really good friend from chaplaincy, from my Wendell Berry years, who we share Marco Polos. It's a video chat app. It's like writing letters, but without the writing. And this is such a good friend. We've been doing this for 5.5 years since I left Winston-Salem. I do this with other people, but not very many other people, because most people don't want to listen to me ramble for 40 minutes. But this Christian colleague is willing to listen to me ramble for 40 minutes, and I will say I'm willing to listen to him ramble for 40 minutes as well. And so I was talking about this question of spirit, and he brought up that from a Christian standpoint, there's a Trinity, right? And there's God, there's the Son, and there's the Holy Spirit. So I started thinking about how that works in a Unitarian Universalist context. So I just want to give you a little bit of a historical journey theologically. The term Unitarian means not Trinitarian, although really what has defined Unitarians over the years more than anti-Trinitarianism is free thinking, is this idea that we get to define things for ourselves. But for most Unitarians classically and Universalists, so in the 19th century, in the 1800s, the focus was on God as a loving Father who created a world in which humans who have enough goodness in us to be good can thrive and flourish and be good people. And Jesus is a model, an exemplar, a kind of teacher of this, how to be in the world. And the Holy Spirit kind of isn't really there in a big way. Then, in the early 20th century, you find a lot of Unitarians finding their way to humanism, or even creating humanism. Many of the signers of the first Humanist Manifesto were Unitarian ministers. And that's interesting. I think that today, I think of humanism as being something you can be with or without God, as long as your focus is on human agency being the primary mover of change and of action in the world and agency in the world. But in that first Humanist Manifesto, we're really talking about an emergence of atheism. And so they've taken away this loving, nurturing Father God, but I want to say that it hasn't changed things in a practical sense on the ground, because they still believed in a world that's well suited to human beings flourishing and thriving and being good people and being people who help grow the world, transform the world to be better and better. And then there's this thing that happens in Unitarian Universalism, particularly in the 1980s, as women's spirituality and women's voices. Now in Unitarian Universalism, more than half of Unitarian Universalist ministers are women. So as the women's influence comes in, we start to have, it's like that world where God was hollowed out of, not even a creator, gets imbued with spirit. I have a great example of this in Spirit of Life, the hymn that we sang earlier, which is as close as we come, I think, as Unitarian Universalists, to a doxology, to a kind of statement of faith. Of course, you don't have to buy into that to be Unitarian Universalist, but it is definitely one of our most popular hymns. So let's look at that hymn for a moment. It says, "Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion." So notice how quickly this spirit of life, right, which come unto me is outside of us, is very quickly, it's within our heart. But then it goes back out with the lines, blow in the wind, rise in the sea. But then it comes right back, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. It's this interesting interplay, and it keeps doing that interplay. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. I think that's important too, to pause on roots, an image of interdependence and interconnection. But also wings set me free, an image of our individuality and our personal journeys. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. I love that back and forth. And notice again, at least by my definition of humanism, this is still a humanist hymn. Because the Spirit of life is blowing in the wind, it's rising in the sea. But when it's time to do something, right, it says, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. It's in our hearts that we're called to make compassion real in the world. When we practice love and kindness, when we practice love, Spirit fills the earth. And if we're called to have justice in the world, it says, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. That's ours to do. So there's kind of two ways that I think we can get to this Spirit of life version of spirit. One is that this big S self, this Buddha nature, and we can find this in Buddhism, actually, that the Buddha nature is within the human being, but it's also within all beings, and even in stones and trees, at least if we're talking about the Zen tradition. Buddha nature expands in that way. And the other way is more this Unitarian Universalist way where we've hollowed out God and then we've put the Spirit of life as almost a divine force back into the world. Okay? In theological speak, that's either pantheism or panentheism. Pantheism being all, divinity is in everything, divinity is everything. Panentheism is divinity is in everything. Important distinction there that I'm not going to get into today. So we have this expansion of our selfhood, of our being, to be in relationship and in communication through breath or spirit with other beings. Right? Through sunlight. Right? There's a very physical way that this is true. We breathe in what plants breathe out. We eat other animals or plants that get their energy from the sun. Right? So this Spirit of life doesn't have to be a metaphysical, supernatural thing for it to be real and for us to be able to use that imagery. So we've got this inner guide that we can look at slantwise. And we've got spirit as this spirit of life that's flowing within us and between all beings. But I think there's another kind of spirit that Parker Palmer is talking about that I'm not sure we as Unitarian Universalists, certainly for myself as a Unitarian Universalist, have a little bit less access to. And that pains me, and I think we're missing out on something. That's this idea that there's something inside that allows us to keep going. Or maybe it's not even inside, I don't know. But there's something in those really challenging moments that we can call on to help us through. We're going to sing a little bit in a few moments. We're going to sing Gather the Spirit, where we talk about how we do that for each other. Just like we share joys and sorrows, we gather together to share our joys. We gather in peace, we gather in thanks, we gather in sympathy, in hope, compassion, strength. And we need to do that. There's nothing better than another, in my experience, than another person who can be with us as a presence as we move through life, in those moments of celebration, in those moments of real hardship. And also, I've never met a person or been in a community that didn't let me down at some point, that just couldn't be there in quite the way I needed. So I think we can't put all of our stock in community being the thing that helps us through hard times. It's one of the things. It needs to be a primary thing. But I think I long for this experience of something that we could call spirit to help me through those hard times. I have a colleague, a Unitarian Universalist colleague, who shared with me a story about a youth who kind of sheepishly or tentatively asked them, "Can Unitarian Universalists pray? Like, is that allowed?" It is allowed, by the way, but it's not necessarily something that we do as a communal practice so much together. Thus, the child, the youth saying, is that something we can do? They were saying, I'd kind of like to do that. They were saying, I'm kind of going through a rough time, and I could use something to call out to help me hold these burdens. So, there's a good reason that we have moved away from a personal God. There's a real danger there that we could talk about that and think about that as if we can go to God and say, oh, this really bad thing is happening, make it stop happening. And that if it does stop happening, God has answered our prayers. And I have to say, I think that's really an abhorrent theology. And the reason is because I look around at the world where there's still plenty of suffering, and nobody's saving people from that suffering. However, we don't have to look at it quite that way. I quoted the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. last Sunday, and I'm going to quote him again. This is the way that we can think about spirit as a personal presence that we can call on. He says, a positive religious faith does not offer an illusion that we shall be exempt from pain and suffering, nor does it imbue us with the idea that life is a drama of unalloyed comfort and untroubled ease. Rather, it instills us with the inner equilibrium needed to face strains, burdens, and fears that inevitably come, and assures us that the universe is trustworthy and God is concerned. The universe is trustworthy, and there's something, this soul or spirit or Buddha nature or inner teacher that's concerned. Again, I want to come back to this image of the animal that initially didn't resonate for me, and I told you often doesn't resonate for participants in our starting points when they first hear it. And I want to come back to it because I think that God and spirit have been made into such a magnificent, highfalutin thing that it can become inaccessible. It can seem, and even Parker Palmer, I think, is guilty of this a little bit by saying, we have to not, I actually think you can run shouting into that forest and you can meet spirit that way. Let's just say that, right? And that there are spiritual practices, not Quaker spiritual practices. He's Quaker, right? He's influenced by those silent meetings. I went to Quaker high school. I've been in a lot of those silent meetings waiting for the spirit to speak through me. But the spirit can speak in tongues, right? It can speak in glorious ecstatic song, right? It can speak through screaming and shouting. It can speak, I would even say, in screams and shouts of horror, screams and shouts of anguish. But I also want to say that spirit doesn't have to be so hard to access. So we've done this exercise at some point in this service where we think of a place or a space or a being that feels safe, an image that we can call on in these challenging times that can center us. This comes out of trauma work and how we can recenter our bodies when they've been triggered by trauma. I have to tell you that the most recent time that I did this practice, the image that came to me was my cat coming and sitting on my lap and purring. And I thought, oh, that's what it feels like. That's what I need in those really, really hard moments. Taylor Swift knows this as well, by the way. Sweet like honey. Karma is a cat, we could say spirit is a cat, purring in my lap because it loves me. flexing like a goddamn acrobat. Me and Spirit vibe like that. I love the acrobat line in there as well, because I think the other thing that's important about the animal, that it's more than just an image. This thing that we're talking about, Spirit. It's important that it be like a person, that it be a being, that it be responsive in the moment. Now, I don't know what that actually looks like or where it comes from, and some people care. I don't really care. I have a friend who had this ayahuasca experience, and he met the great goddess, and I said, yeah, but even maybe it's just in your psyche. Maybe it's not an actual great. And he was like, no, it was an actual great goddess, and maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't. To me, it doesn't matter. To some people, it really does matter in both directions. Some people are like, no, it was not actually the great goddess. I know it wasn't, but I still got something out of that experience. And some people are like, no, it's important to me that it was. For me, I'm agnostic on that. It doesn't matter. But it does matter that there's this thing to connect with. So I think it's funny. It occurred to me as I was working on this sermon that I kind of created for y'all a trinity of sorts in this Unitarian space, right? We've got Spirit as this inner guide that lives within us. That's one way you can understand Spirit. That deep wisdom. We've got Spirit as the spirit of life flowing through the trees and the skies and the rivers and our own hearts, stirring us with songs of compassion, moving in our hands to shape justice in the world. And we have this cat purring in our lap version, right? This being that can travel and journey with us through the challenges of life.
Okay, we now come to my personally favorite part of the service, not because it's over, but because these words are just so beautiful and they're the foundational words of this congregation. It just about makes me cry every time. So, would you please rise now in body or in spirit? And if you're at home, please, I know it sounds silly, but do it anyway. Extend your hands out toward your computer screen. And here, please extend your hands out towards each other as we say our closing words. As we extinguish our chalice, I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity. And as you look around and see the magic in each other's eyes, remember this feeling. And now that we've gathered together in this welcoming and inclusive spiritual home, let us go out into the world, nourished, rejuvenated, and inspired to share our values. Blessed be.